Hello, my name is Ilya Sokin, and today I'm going to give an introductory lecture on computer vision in robotics in the context of robotic football. We will begin with the problem statement of object detection in robotic football and continue into the specific methods of doing so. Let us first talk about the role of the computer vision in the whole project. The whole robotic pipeline starts from the sensing, and the camera is the most important sensor of the whole robotic pipeline. Why is it so? First of all, humanoid robots follow in almost all the senses and the mechanics the humanoid or human platform, and humans have their vision as the most important sensor as well. It is estimated that humans perceive up to 70% of the whole information about the surrounding with visual channel. And while it could be substituted in case of vision loss by other sensing channels, vision remains an important channel for regular, so to say, human. And in the robots, in the humanoid robots, in the context of football, it is the same way. The most important sensor is a camera, and the majority of the information in terms of both megabytes and valuable data comes from the camera. So, as you can tell, each frame is several megabytes. If it's full HD, so it's 1920 by 1080. And it's several megabytes per frame, several dozens of megabytes per second, which results in enormously big arrays of data that have to be transformed into a compact representation of the small set of meaningful features in the frame that we are interested in. For instance, in robotic football, it could be the position of the ball, the position of the goalposts, and the lines of the marking on the field, and maybe the opponents or teammates. So several millions of numbers that are basically the image have to be transferred into a compact representation of a dozen or so numbers. And after this process is complete, we have to transfer the pixel coordinates or the objects that were found in the frame into the world representation. By that I mean that we are not exactly interested in the specific object being in the coordinates 300, 200 in the frame, in pixels. That's not what we want to achieve. We want to find out that, let's say, the ball is 5 meters ahead from the robot. So this problem is being solved with the geometric methods. It could be simplified down to the sinus and cosine theorem. Basically, we take into account the height of the robot, all the angles, and using standard geometrical optics and the kinematics of the robot, we can find out what are the world coordinates of the robots in meters in the robot's frame. After that, we have to find out what are the robot's coordinates in the world. In other words, we have to localize the robot. Our robots are represented in the simplified form by 3 coordinates, by x, y, and theta, which is the angle on the field. This representation is enough for us to solve our strategical problems and to plan ahead the motion on the field. So the robot has to take into account all the previously obtained data and solve the inverse problem of localization, meaning that the robot is capable of observing certain landmarks on the field, and it has to guess with the presence of noise what is its position on the field, basically. And after the position is found, the robot has to solve the planning problem, which is called, for clarity, strategy. It has to plan accordingly with the movements of its teammates, and the end result should be to score a goal into the goalposts of the opponent team. And after this planning is performed with some graph-based searches or other approaches of local and global planning, we head towards the last part of the whole pipeline, which is motion, or performing the actions that were calculated and found to be optimal in the previous module, in the strategy. At the last part of the pipeline, in motion, there are several levels of control that are implemented one on top of the other in a way that allows the robot to move its limbs in the space properly. Our robots have 20 controllable degrees of freedom, so they're kind of complex, mechanically speaking. It means that the dimensionality of the output vector is 20. So the robot has an input, as we have said previously, of several million numbers, and its output is the positions of the servo motors. Our robots are controlled by position, so it's a 20-dimensional vector that is embodied into the mechanical change of the position of the limbs. Now let us state the most important and the most fundamental problem of computer vision, which is detection, at least in our field, in the field of robotic football and robotic sports as well. As I mentioned previously, the input of the computer vision module or the vision module is an image which is an array of pixels. We will have a glance on that during the seminar. And the output is the coordinates of the object. The object is described as a bounding box, or box that encloses the whole object with the minimal area. And it is described by 4 numbers, which are top coordinate, left coordinate, width and height of the box. So mathematically speaking, we are transferring the vector in the space with crazy dimensionality of several million to the space with dimensionality of only 4. Here in the slide you can see the problem that is already solved. The small green rectangle that encloses the red area is the bounding box of the basket that we had to find out while solving the problem of robotic basketball. So the green carpet that you see in the frame is the field of the play, and this game is performed not with an opponent team, but with just the basketball and with the field and itself. And the robot is supposed to put the ball into the basket. First of all, it has to detect the basket. So this is the toy problem that we will be solving for the following lecture. There are multiple other problems, for instance, tracking, which is finding the position of a certain object from frame to frame. Also, there is a problem of segmentation, which means assigning the label of a class to each of the pixels of the input image. But they could be understood on the basis of the problem of object detection. So we will start precisely from that. All the computer vision, if we are talking about monocular vision, starts from the single image. And if we want to detect several objects, let's say in the problem of basketball, we want to detect both the basket and the ball, we have to perform the calculations and object detection in several branches of processing that are outlined as a scheme in the slide. So all the processing is performed in sequences, and the output of the previous part of the previous filter, as we call them, is the input of the following filter. They could have different length, meaning the different number of filters, and it could be an arbitrary number of them in the pipeline. We just have to keep an eye on the performance. And these sequences could be set in the form of configuration files for convenience, in order for us not to rewrite the code each time, but to load new configuration file. But I'm running ahead of myself, so let's proceed to some details or an outline of the simplest detection pipeline possible. One of the most important features that come into mind when we're talking about an object is its color. So we can try to detect the object by color. Let's say that we want to detect a red basketball in the problem of robotic basketball. So let us try to judge the pixels by their color, and we can try to find out this red blob of pixels, this compact place in the image where the red pixels belong to. First, we can apply a pixel-wise if. It's a really simple concept. We can apply if to a certain value, to a variable, and also we can apply if to the whole array of variables. We can find out if the channel that is represented by the pixel fits into certain limits of red channel. And if it does, we can put a high value, or 255, into the output of this filter. Otherwise, we can put just a 0 or a black pixel into the corresponding place. And with that in mind, we come to this second picture here, second from the left, which is the raw mask of the red color in this image. So once again, white pixels represent the pixels from the original image that are red enough, so to say, by our criteria, and black pixels represent the opposite. After we have obtained this mask, we have to process it. We have to get rid of the noise and all the extra objects that do not correspond to a real basketball. Because here you can see that there are a lot of noisy areas in the mask, in the frame. That is so because all our cameras are not ideal, and the light is blinking all over the place. And if the illumination has slightly changed, maybe because of the sun or because of something else, the detection pipeline will be slightly off, and the mask will never be perfect. So we have to take that into account and process the mask so that we can get rid of the noise and unnecessary objects. And the last part here is just to find out the remaining white area that corresponds to the object that we were intended to detect. Let's talk about the representation of the image. What is image precisely? We know that they come from the cameras, but how are they represented in the computer? As you can tell, an image in the computer or in your program that you're running on your laptop is a three-dimensional array of values. It has the dimensionality of, let's say, size x by size y by 3. Size x and size y are those values in the resolution that are written on the box of the camera when you're buying it. And this number of 3 corresponds to red, green, and blue channels that, again, correspond to the 3 types of photosensitive cells in human eye. So we perceive all the objects in the world as the combination of 3 basic colors, red, green, and blue. And following that, we have constructed the cameras to show us precisely the same things that we see with our naked eye. So each image is an array of values, a 3-dimensional array, size x by size y by 3. And I have mentioned red, green, and blue values. They are the most trivial and straightforward way to represent the color. We can, in an additive manner, mix together all those colors, and as a result, we will get anything: violet, red, green, blue, magenta, whatever else. But there are certain different ways of representing the same color scheme or the same color space, the whole amount of variations of the color that we could think of. And we will talk about that just later. The simple color space, which is RGB, fits perfectly for obtaining the data from the camera, and it could be interpreted almost straightforwardly like the amount of light or the amount of energy that came to a certain place into this part of the spectrum, same for green and same for blue. And other color spaces are designed to detect objects properly. So the important thing here is that the color space and the color spaces in general are just different ways of representing the same physical process. the same light coming to the same photosensitive matrix. And the choice of one color space over the other color space is the matter of convenience and the matter of problem that we're trying to solve with this color space. As we have already mentioned, RGB is a color space that is representing each color as a combination of three basic color or unit colors. And on the left, you can see the almost Euler scheme of red, green, and blue colors and the ways in which they add together. So if we add together blue and green, we will get as the output the light blue color. And the same goes for all the other different colors. And on the right, you can see the cube with 1/8 of it dissected. And on the closest to the viewer vertex, you will be able to see the white color as the combination of all the unit or basic colors to the maximum. Let us talk in more detail about how are the masks constructed. Once more, we have an image, an input image that comes from the camera, and it has certain spatial dimensions and the dimensionality of 3 channel-wise. We want to find out for each pixel, for each combination of basic colors, does it fit into certain requirements of being reddish or being red color or not. So in a channel-wise manner, we can perform the following. Let us check the plot on the slide. This is the schematically drawn distribution of the intensities or the values of the pixels in the frame. Let's say that it will be our red channel. What is going on with the red channel in the original image? The majority of the frame doesn't contain much of the red. And one certain area, which is the object that we're trying to detect, the basketball, the red piece of tube, basically, that was the basketball. But this red basket is high enough in the red channel, meaning that it has much more red in it than the other parts of the frame. So in the distribution on the left, we can see that there is a global maxima of the red intensity, which lies in the area of low absolute values, low absolute intensities of the red channel. And there is also a smaller peak on the right, which corresponds to the local maxima of slightly higher values of red in this channel. And with 2 yellow vertical lines, we can mark the lower threshold of red color and higher threshold of red color. So we will consider all the values in the red channel that are higher than the lower threshold and lower than the higher threshold as the ones that fit our requirements, that satisfy us in terms of being red enough. And after that, we do the same thing for 2 other channels. Just once again, we have an array of pixels, and in a channel-wise manner, we can, for each pixel, find out does it fit into a certain range of values from lower threshold to higher threshold. If it does, the corresponding pixel in the mask will be white, otherwise it will be black. And the pixel will be white if this condition holds for all the 3 channels: red, green, and blue. If we're not interested in detecting anything in the green channel, we can set the thresholds to be as low as possible and as high as possible. The good question here is what is exactly as high as possible? The default way of representing pixels or representing the color values in the images is using unsigned 8-bit numbers. So they have 8 bits to represent all the possible values, and the whole number of the colors that could be represented in such a way is 256, starting from 0 and ending by 255. So if we set all the values to be precisely 0, red, green, and blue value, we will result in purely black color. Otherwise, if we will set 255 in all the 3 channels, we will get the pure white color. And these values are being compared to certain thresholds that we set in advance, and then comes the mask in the way that we described previously. This method seems to be fine, although it requires some hand-picking and tuning of the color-based filters all over the place. It seems to be working, right? So what's the problem? The problem is that this method is not robust. It will not work if we change the lighting conditions. Let us imagine that we have added a second light emitter, maybe a second light bulb, with the same spectrum in the same room. Everything is the same, the object is the same, the camera is the same, the lighting has the same spectrum, it just has different intensity. And what will happen? Let's try to imagine what will happen with the distribution that is on the left here. So the old distribution is drawn by a black line, and the new distribution is drawn by a dashed blue line. Why is it so? Because we have more light coming from the light source to the object, more light is reflected, and more light is captured by the photosensitive elements. We will naturally have higher values of the pixels in all the image, so the whole distribution will be slightly off to the right. And the problem here is that if we tune the color-based filter basing on the previous values or previous distribution of the colors in the frame, these lower and higher thresholds will not work out with the new distribution or the changed distribution of the values in the image. And that is indeed a problem. You can intuitively understand this concept by the picture that is on the right. These two cats are clearly of the same type of animals, but in the RGB color space, they seem to be different to each other. They're distinct, and they should not be distinct. So we have to construct a certain color space that will allow us to introduce some entity, some value of catness, so to say, that we will be able to sort or to distinguish by. The solution to this problem is the color space HSV, which stands for the hue, saturation, and value. Also, it could be mentioned as hue, saturation, and luminosity or brightness or something like that. But the point here is that the first color, or the first axis, it's better to say, stands for the color tone or the hue, the part of the spectrum, the colors from the rainbow, basically, from red to violet. The second is responsible for saturation, or how saturated, how bright is the color, how different it is from the gray. And the last channel here stands for the brightness, or the value, the whole amount of light that comes into the photosensitive matrix. What's the point here? Well, first let's take a look on this color space. Let's check how it is represented. We remember that RGB color space is naturally represented by a cube, and that is fine. And HSV color space, in contrast to that, is typically represented by a cylinder, or it could be represented as a cone with all the bottom surface of the cylinder being squeezed into a single dot. But here it is a cylinder, so let's try to talk about the axis of this cylinder. And where do the axis of this color space belong to? First of all, the hue axis, or the color tone axis. It goes along the circumference of this cylinder, and it is looped so that if we increase the hue values more and more, we will result in the same spot. The change in this axis results in the changing of just the color tone, not the brightness and not the saturation, but only the color tone. And it goes from red through orange to yellow to green and so on. The second axis is again horizontal, and it comes from the axis of the cylinder to the outer surface of the cylinder. Here it's demarcated as S, saturation, and the closer the point is to the axis of the cylinder, the more bleak and less saturated it is. So on the axis of the cylinder we have all the colors starting from black and resulting in white, which are two specific shades of gray. And on the other points on the axis we have just different shades of gray, starting from very dark and ending up with very bright ones. The last axis is the value axis, or the brightness axis. It's the only one vertical, and it corresponds to the net amount of light that comes into the specific pixel on the photosensitive matrix, or it corresponds, in other words, to the brightness of the object. You can see here that on the bottom layer of this whole cylinder, all the values are black or almost black. This is because the brightness value for the whole bottom surface of the cylinder is very low. And in contrast to that, at the upper surface, all the colors are very bright and saturated. So, getting back to our previous example and the problem with RGB color space, let us imagine that we want to deal with this problem of changing luminosity in the scene that we are filming. We can simply ignore certain changes in the V channel, in the brightness channel. We can set up certain thresholds in the color tone or hue channel. We can then set up certain limitations in the saturation channel. And in the value channel, our thresholds could be from, say, 10 to 250. The range is kind of big, so all the objects that will fit into the hue and saturation requirements will result in the white pixels in the mask. And the brightness here will be not important. We will almost ignore the brightness altogether. This is the way in which the HSV color space makes it possible to detect objects under varying lighting conditions. You can tell that there should be a conversion from one color space to another, but it's quite complex and it's clearly non-linear. The problem here is that if we are trying to transform the color space that is shaped by like RGB into a different color space with different axes, and they have to be capable of encoding the same variety of colors, this transform that transfers one color space into another has to be non-linear and quite complex. The problem is that in certain areas, for example, in very dark areas, it tends to increase the noise values. And if we're filming some dark area, dark room, we are getting the image, the original image from the camera in RGB color space, and in HSV color space, all those noises are enlarged so that two neighboring pixels of the dark image, that is, let's say one of them is slightly redder than the other one and another is slightly greenish, so they could be very distant to each other in terms of the color tone, the hue. And this is the drawback of such a transform, and we all the time have to remember about that. And we have to understand, just before trying to tune the filter, that there is no black magic here, and if there is not enough light in the room, the detection will not work properly. Let's move forward into the area of processing the masks. On the previous step, we have obtained the mask of the object with some color-based filter. We have applied pixel-wise if or conditional operator, and we have finally understood that here in this one-channel image, which is the mask, we have some shapes that remind us of the object that we're trying to detect. Now we have to get rid of the objects that are not really there. So we can apply a set of transforms that are called morphological processing. This naming comes from the word morph, which is shape in Greek. And the first operation is so-called erosion or eroding. It is given here as an example in the slide. So erosion makes the areas of the mask slightly smaller. It literally erodes those areas of the mask, and it could be understood as dissolving of the salt in the water or something of that kind, dissolving of the ice in hot water. And the whole point, the whole idea here is that if certain area is small enough, it will disappear completely and we will get rid of it. So if we have some kind of salt and pepper noise all over the place, there are many areas in the mask that are just 1 pixel in size. With this morphological operation of erosion, we can get rid of them. But there's a problem. We will also decrease the size of the part of the mask that corresponds to the real object. It will shrink slightly and it will not cover the object properly. What can we do about that? Well, we can perform the opposite operation, which is called morphological dilation, or let's say it's enlargement, basically. We will not dive into the mathematics behind it. You can check the OpenCV documentation for that. But the idea is basically the opposite. We are enlarging the areas, and if the area was deleted completely by the erosion operation, it will not appear again while performing dilation, so we will be able to almost restore the big areas of the mask and delete completely the small areas of the mask. This sequence of operation is called morphological opening, and it results in the deletion of the small areas of the mask. The opposite operation is called closing. It's first dilating the image and then eroding the image. And the point here is to fill the small gaps inside of the areas of the mask. Some pixels could be slightly off from the thresholds, so it could happen so that there are little black holes inside of the white area of the mask. And with the first dilating and then eroding, we will get rid of those and practically restore the original shape of the area of the mask. The last thing from classical mask processing that we have to talk about is the connected components analysis. It's an alternative, in some sense, approach to the morphological analysis, but they basically belong to the different areas of application. They are, in some sense, interchangeable, but not completely. So let us start from the definition. What is a connected component, basically? The connected component is a set of pixels in a two-dimensional array that has the property that you can go from one pixel of an area to another pixel of an area, staying in the same set of pixels. So at the leftmost image in the slide, you can see a connected component, and you can go from one orange pixel to another orange pixel while staying inside of the connected component, inside of this set of pixels. And the same property holds for the area that corresponds to the basketball in the mask. You can see that despite having some black holes inside of it, it is connected in this sense, and you can go from one pixel of this area of the mask to another, staying inside of this area. And this connected components analysis relies on calculating certain statistics for those areas. And the most important and the most basic and fundamental of them are, of course, width and height. We have to know what are the sizes of the object that we are trying to detect. Another one is the pixel area. It's just the number of white pixels in the connected component. And the last two are X and Y, so just the spatial placement of this area in the mask. And with these numbers, with these statistics at hand, we can filter the connected components. We can delete the small ones, we can delete the big ones if we're interested in detecting just the small objects in the frame. If we want to detect only the ball, which let's say could be white, but not the goal posts, we can filter the objects by the ratio between the height and the width. And if it's close to 1, it could be a ball, that's fine. And if it's, let's say, 5, it's clearly not a ball. The ball is like a circle in the image. It's not elongated that much. So with these instruments at hand, we can get rid of the objects that are not really present in the image, and we can transform our mask to a mask that is denoised, so it doesn't have any noise in it, and it doesn't have any objects that do not appear in the image in reality. That was an introduction to the classical computer vision and classical ways of image processing. We will talk about all those matters in the seminar part. We will do the same stuff item by item with the Python code in Jupyter Notebook. And we will do that quite a lot. But after that, we will inevitably get into the field of neural networks. And I have to say a couple of words about that. Why do we even care? Why should we do that? Well, on the right, you can see a human, but this human is artificially generated. There is a website which is thispersondoesn'texist.com, and with each reload of this website, you will get a brand new image, a picture of a face of a human that was generated by a type of networks, neural networks, which is called generative adversarial networks. They're capable of generating images that are not that much distinguishable from the real ones. Probably you can see some artifacts here and there, and even in this image, there are some suspicious details like the pieces of the glass of this guy, and fingers and teeth are usually not generated properly by these networks, but with a quick glance you cannot really tell that this human is artificially generated. So we cannot do anything like that with classical computer vision. And on the left, there are two rats. One of them is clearly a real one, and another one is not a real one. Let's say that we're trying to construct a rat detector. We can try using the methods that I have mentioned, color-based detection. Maybe we can apply some shape-based detection. We will talk about that in the seminar as well. We can try to judge these rats by their size, the ratio of the width to the height, maybe something like that. But the problem, the fundamental problem here is that we can think of an imitation of a rat that is very close to the real rat in terms of the color and shape and overall distribution of features. We can cover it in artificial fur, and it will look clearly suspiciously to a human eye. And with any classical method of processing, we will be not capable of understanding if this rat is real or artificial. And with this type of problems, we have to use neural networks because they are a capable instrument in such fields where we have a lot of features and we cannot really formalize them anyhow. We cannot describe in all the detail the process of detection the real rat or distinguishing real rat from the artificial one, because certain processes happen in our perception or even before our perception. We cannot understand how do we perceive rats, and consequently we cannot write the same operators in the code. We cannot explain, so to say, to the computer how do we detect threats. So we have to move towards the data-driven detection methods. Today we have talked about the classical detection pipeline, what are the main components of it, how can we represent the images in the computer, what is the color-based detection, and how can we process the mask that we have obtained during the color-based detection in order to get rid of the noise and finally detect the object that we are interested in.